Good evening. This is your host, Dan Stafford, with the Midwestern Geek in Cali podcast. Podcasting from 42 Tardis Way in beautiful Temecula, California, summer's winter home, and less than a mile from the cool classic subdivision of Starlight Ridge. This evening, I want to talk about a couple of subjects, and they're not seemingly related directly, but I think there's a way to relate them that kind of nerves me out a little bit. The first one I want to talk about is robotics. The technology is making massive strides. There will be some show links, article links, and such at www.midwesterngeekandcali.com. This will be episode 46. I will have links to supporting articles in the show notes on episode 46. And I think someone needs to paint a picture of the convergence of these two technologies, really three, and what it might possibly mean for the future. And there's a lot of different ways things could go here. But let's start off with laying the background technologies out, what I'm talking about tech-wise, and then we'll get into what the synergies for those are. The first technology is robotics. The technology is making incredible advancements very rapidly. It just keeps moving on and on and on. And I'm not just talking about humanoid robots and little home use robots like Alexa and that kind of thing. No, I'm talking about industrial robots. I'm talking about food service robots. I'm talking about checkout line robots. I'm talking about replicators, robotically controlled. See, with robots, they're soon enough going to be able to do almost anything a human being can do. Almost anything. And that's going to make it very difficult for the already interestingly tough labor market. Because I got to tell you, if you believe the labor numbers that are out there, I got a bridge for sale over in Brooklyn. You know, the old saw. Yeah. It's not so much the percentage numbers that they're reporting, it's the percentage numbers they aren't reporting. It's the number of people who've given up looking for work. Yeah, that's not really on the table. And then there's the people around the rest of the world. What happens when the robots can do anything human beings can do in a capitalist society? People get replaced. Well, what happens to those people who are replaced? I mean, there's lots of people talking about things like universal basic income and the like. In other words, um, everybody gets a certain set amount of income per month, and it's really basic. I mean, not you're not going to live high on the hog on this if it ever actually comes to pass. But universal basic income, all right, some people have talked about putting a tax on the robots, is because the robots are really going to be sucking up the money that would have been paid out in wages. So, the government's got to get its tax money somehow, doesn't it? Well, maybe. But what do we do with people that get put out of work now? What do you see with your own two eyes with people that are permanently out of work? If you look around a little bit, you don't have to look very far. You see things like homeless people living along creeks and railroad tracks and on the streets in tent cities and getting shoved around and, you know, people putting spikes on park benches and under bridges where people like to sleep when they've got nowhere else to go, making it illegal to sleep in cars. And really, they just throw these people away. I mean, if it weren't for the rest of us and the things that we throw away, the material things that we throw away, what would these homeless people even eat or wear or sleep in? You know, would they have anything at all left? You can see what society does, what a capitalist society does with the people it doesn't value. It's obvious because they're already doing it. Just look at the homeless population now. And then wonder what's going to happen when they don't need people to work anymore. They being the wealthy few. When they don't need people that they don't care about to do work for them anymore. People that they feel in competition with for resources and money and status. People that they've structured the system to keep as low on the economic ladder as possible already. This is the way the society is structured. So, what are they going to do with all of us when the robots can do what we do? When the artificial intelligence can do what a lawyer does? When the artificial intelligence can do what a technician does? When the artificial intelligence and the robots can do what a plumber does, what an electrician does, what a line manufacturer in a plant does, like a manufacturing plant does. Basically, when the robots and artificial intelligence can do anything that we can do, they aren't going to need us anymore. So if we leave society structured the way it is, you've got a perfect example of what they're going to do with us living in the streets. They're just going to let us rot. You really think if they control the government that they're going to set the government up to give us all money to do nothing if they have no use for us? Really? I, you know, my brother, hey Larry, if you're listening to this, I know you're all for uh, an automated society where the robots do everything and everything the robots don't make is replicated by 3D printing and all those advances keep continuing. And I know you've talked about a universal basic income because you want to increase the automation society, the automation of labor. The question I have is unless we can force the government to be under the control of the people and set up to where people, we've got a lot of mental conditioning to deal with, first of all. Most of American society has been raised for generations on a solid work ethic. If you're not working, you're worthless in most Americans' minds. They don't value art and music in general at the level most people are capable of enough to value that aspect of things. And innovation is only valued if it's somehow profitable to industry and doesn't threaten existing industries to the point where they're afraid of going out of business because of new disruptive technology. It has to be developed in secret. See, capitalism is actually a brake on innovation. It slows it down. It slows it down because those whom it might supplant are afraid, because if they lose what they already have, if they lose the usefulness of the infrastructure they've already built, they're afraid that they'll go bankrupt and be left out on the street and out of work and out of money and lose their fortunes, because they're afraid that in the end they'll end up like the homeless people in the tent cities, because that's what our society tells us. If you're not working, you're out on the street. That's the way our mentality is in this country, and it's been ingrained at us at every level of society. The only people that don't work and are valued in any way at all by those really in power are the children of the wealthy. And then some of them are even forced to work. So, really, what is there in our societal makeup, our mental makeup, our view and outlook on life as it currently is, our capitalistic system, to give anyone in power any reason to keep people that no longer are needed to work? What? I'm stretching, I'm trying to think of something. Um, I don't see the majority of the wealthy elite around the globe as being compassionate people in general. Not really. And with the advent of computerized voting machines, I trust less and less in representative democracy, especially being a technician in the technology industry, a computer guy, basically, computer and communications and networking and all that kind of stuff. And I don't trust voting on computers at all. I never have. I was arguing against it before they were even allowed to administer the vote. I'm still against it. I don't think there's any way to actually secure computerized elections, and I don't really trust that the population is in control of the government. I really don't. I think it's rigged at the level of counting the vote. I think it's rigged in psychological manipulation of the population ahead of the vote. And I think it's rigged in so many other ways, it's not even funny. I just don't believe it. I don't believe the results, and I don't believe the way the media portrays the population of this country. I think that there's a great disconnect between the polls and what you see on the news. And I think social media is really more of an echo chamber than anything else. You're liking and friending people that have similar viewpoints to you. And what do people do? What do people do on social media? People block people that they disagree with. I see it left, right, sideways, upwards, downwards, and digging in the groundwards, because every time I turn around, someone that disagrees with someone else, they just shut them out, tune them out. It's like football now. People treat this like a sports game, the political arena. They forget civil service. They forget the art of compromise. That's something that's lost. Civil society is hanging on by a thread with the way our mentality currently is. And I think our media plays into that in a major way. And we have major consolidation of the control over major media. And now we're getting rid of net neutrality, so we're going for major control and consolidation over who can say what online and how it gets heard and who hears it. And it's not heading in a general public direction, it's heading in a corporate direction, at least as it currently sits. So pretty soon, anybody that disagrees just isn't going to get heard. When you look at movies, I've been watching movies since I was a teenager. I'm in my mid 50s now, and I have seen the general arc of movies go from storytelling and hopeful, upbeat stories and a gradual progression of portrayal of people of color as worthwhile, professional, and up and coming, and things getting better. It has totally shifted in the last 20 years, and almost everything I see is violent, special effects, crime drama, war, apocalypse. Where is the positive vision of humanity's future? Find me a sci-fi show that's not dark, dreary, apocalyptic, dystopian. It's a running joke with me and my wife that it's hard to find a science fiction movie or show that isn't some kind of future grunge society at best, where poor people are trodden over. We're being conditioned by all of this. Our entertainment is conditioning our minds that this is normal. This is just the way it is. This is just the way people are. And this is just the way it's gonna be. Well, I don't think it has to be that way, but I think we're in a vacuum of positive vision in our society and in our media. And I think it's setting us up for what these technologies are going to enable. I've already mentioned artificial intelligence and robotics, and there's a third one that's coming out. It's called 5G networking. We're talking major increases in speed of wireless networking planet-wide. Major. And what you don't understand about networking is, okay, with IP version 6, there were about 4.3 billion IP addresses available under that, or sorry, IP version 4. There were about 4.3 billion IP addresses total in that whole IP addressing scheme. And the way it was actually structured and used, there were only about 250 million actually usable IP addresses in that scheme. Now, network address translation is I'm not going to dive into that too deep, but it's a technology that has allowed us to extend the usefulness of IP version 4. But all your computers for years now have been compatible with IP version 6. And IP version 6 has so many IP addresses available in IP version 6 that you could assign an IP address to every atom on the surface of the earth and have enough IP addresses left over to assign an IP address to every atom on another 100 planets the size of Earth. It's that crazy many. Now, you take 5G networking, IP version 6, and then nanoscale networking devices. Basically, what I'm going to call net dust. You can embed network devices with accelerometers that can detect motion and connect with each other in a mesh network worldwide and connect back to centralized servers in data centers all over the planet and at super high speeds to the point where Nothing on the surface of the planet is unnetworked, because if it doesn't have embedded network devices at the nanoscale in it, it will have what I call net dust, which is just scattered on the wind and all over the planet. You inhale it, it'll be in your body, it'll be all over everything, it'll be all over the earth. There will be no escaping the IP version 6 network and 5G connectivity anywhere on the planet. It will be able to be solar powered. It will be able to be powered at night by the difference in heat from your body to the atmosphere, as it's cool at night and your body is warm, and that's a temperature difference, and that's all most generation technology needs, is some difference of temperature to be able to extract enough energy for microscopic devices to run. And now you have artificial intelligence, you have robotics to do the labor, you have artificial intelligence to do the knowledge work that people like myself or lawyers or accountants or any of those type of more skilled, knowledgeable workers do. And you have networking capable of networking everything on the entire planet, so there's nowhere you could possibly hide, not even underground. And you have no use for 7 billion people on the surface of the planet if you're one of the wealthy elite. So if we do not structure society now in such a way as to value people regardless of whether they're working or not, I'm not so sure that all those dark movies and TV shows are going to be so far out of whack. Now, if we start taking an awareness of this and taking an awareness of the darkness of vision being presented to us in all of our entertainment outlets and news media, and we start counterpointing with a positive vision and actually, working together to come up with positive ideas on how to shape the future, and start getting people used to the idea that the inherent value in a human being is just that they're a living, breathing human being to begin with. Otherwise, if we keep the same psychological mindset, the same ingrained ideas of what makes people worthwhile that we have, that have been handed down to us by what were originally feudal overlords and have become capitalistic overlords, we are going to find ourselves in one big worldwide tent city. Now, that's one vision. I happen to like my brother Larry's vision a lot better. I like it way better. In Larry's vision, it's more like Star Trek, like the next generation. Like you walk up to a replicator and you just say, hey, tea, Earl Grey hot, and it makes it for you on the spot. Or you need a new pair of shoes and you just go in and punch them up and, here's my feet, laser scan them and make me a pair of shoes that fit, and there you go. And okay, I need some dinner, so I walk up to the machine and get some dinner. I need somewhere to shelter and lay my head for the night. I get that. I need a new comb because my old one broke. Well, throw the old one in recycling and walk up to a replicator and get a new one, and you got that. And we colonize the rest of the solar system. The only reason, there's a reason. There's a reason right there. If we want humanity to be able to colonize the rest of the solar system and outer space, then we need population to do that. But will the corporate overlords go there. I know one that would like to, Elon Musk. Richard Branson's another one, I think. I think the two of them, maybe. Well, what about the rest of them? What about like the Koch brothers? What about like Adelson Sheldon or Sheldon Adelson or whatever his name is? What about people like that? Do you think they think any of us are worth anything if they can't get any work out of us because they don't need us to work? I'd rather see an Elon Musk vision of the future come to pass, or maybe, despite the foibles with Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg actually seems to care a little bit more about people. Maybe, you know, um, Bill Gates and Melinda Gates seem to have a little bit of a heart. Um, Sir Richard Branson seems to. I don't know. The rest of them, it seemed to me it's kind of sketchy, but with that much power in a few people's hands, I don't know. I don't like it. And I don't really trust it. And so it makes me want to resist automation. But what you resist usually gets more energy out of you and gets stronger. So that considered, it makes me want to do something different and move forward. Now, here's the thing with my brother's vision of the future, it's entirely possible. It is. Where the machines do all the work and we do all the living, and we colonize the solar system and other solar systems beyond this eventually. And there's other things that these kind of technologies can enable because they're already working on control systems that read your brain waves, right? In order to control machinery. I mean, I've seen it on television, old school television, like CBS Sunday Morning Show already has done devices where a headset and it just reads what you're thinking in your mind right into a text document. Because when you're saying words in your head, your brain is sending electrical signals to the muscles in your throat and your tongue and all that stuff as if you were speaking, but just not enough to actually make the muscles move and do the speaking. And it reads those and converts them into text. And it was pretty accurate. And this is on CBS Sunday Morning Show, which is generally watched by an older audience, which happens to be a good show. They're usually generally upbeat and positive and have some really cool art stuff. But even there, you have to be kind of careful and watch for programming. And I don't mean programming like programming a television show. I mean programming like programming our minds. You have to be watching what paradigm people are framing things in. You have to watch everything for framing because they will frame things in such a way as to make you initially head down one fork in the road when there's possibly another. Every show you have to watch that, even the best ones have framing, and you have to be careful of what it is. So being aware of it's half the issue. I mean, once you see it and you start to recognize it, then you can actually decide how to think about it and how to ignore it or how to better think about things, how to think about things in a different light and different way. But we've got to come up with a positive vision. We need to take artificial intelligence and use it to control how resources are allocated based on need and environmental sciences rather than on greed and wealth production. We need to shift away from the idea of producing wealth because wealth as a concept is destructive. We need to shift to a concept of resource allocation based on human need, environmental necessity, and also decency and quality of life for human beings. Those three factors should be the primary driving factor behind how resources are distributed all around the planet, because it shouldn't be just USA first. It should be human beings first. And then all the other life on the planet that makes a healthy biosphere on the planet needs to be taken care of too. Now, that doesn't mean that everything human beings are doing is wrong. That's not what I'm saying. But we need to look at and evaluate every aspect of life. And given the technologies I just outlined for you, it's entirely possible to use artificial intelligence, hyper networking, and robotics to be able to use natural resources in ways that follow environmental science and make sure that everyone gets everything, their basic needs met, everyone. And that we can do the same thing as we colonize space. We can have a much brighter future. It's highly possible, and this technology can enable that kind of future just as easily as it can enable a dark and dystopian future. But if we don't start planting those positive visions in people's minds, if we don't start coming up with an alternative media that portrays those kind of visions, we are going to get the dark future that we're visualizing. If we can start actually putting out a positive vision of the future and putting that together and putting that in people's minds instead, then we can have that future that we're visualizing there. But you have to be able to see a direction for the future before you can even begin to make it work on making it happen. And given what I've talked about in other episodes of this show with quantum entanglement and attracting to yourself that which you visualize strongly and have strong emotions about, it all works together. We need to work on having a positive vision for the future, and we need to work hard on that. That's where we need to start. And we need teams of people that are putting together entertainment shows that show a positive vision for the future. We desperately need that. We need news gathering organizations that gather positive news and hopeful news and give it just as much precedence and priority as the traditional corporate media has given to negative news and and depressing news. We need to we need to lift each other up. We need to lift each other up psychologically. We need to lift each other up financially. We need to lift each other up technologically. And we need to work together. And there's an awful lot of caring people out there who are frustrated and wondering what direction to take. Well, here's a direction to take: put together positive stories, stories of a future that's bright and hopeful and positive and uplifting and uplifts everyone. Put together entertainment and stories and books and TV shows, or not even TV shows, online videos, whatever it takes, that shows how we can go out and colonize the system and not mess it up, because we've been programmed that everything that we do, we mess up. So, of course, we follow our programming because that's all we ever see as a vision of the future. But I'm telling you, when I was younger, when I was a kid, it was more mixed. There were dark and dystopian visions of the future, but there were also positive and uplifting and hopeful visions of the future. And I've kind of seen the one seem to fade out of the picture as the media was consolidated and privatization of the schools got taken over, and all the squashing of the freedom of speech on college campuses has happened. We cannot afford to have a continued vacuum of positive vision. We absolutely need to develop a positive vision for the future. And so, if nothing else, if you take nothing else away from this show, this episode, go out there and start a writers club if you're so inclined, if you're a storyteller, if it's an audio stories or written stories or visual stories, go out there and make the kind of fiction that lifts people's spirits and gives them a positive, hopeful idea of the future, and put it out there for people to see and hear and read. Put it in competition with all the dystopian crap that's being fed to us in the movie theaters and on television and online and in our pop culture shows, and and at least let's take part of the population that's willing to embrace that and give them something to visualize, something to hear in their mind, something to read in their books and magazines, and let's go that route. So that's where we start. We start with stories of a possible positive future. Positive fiction. Positive fiction. And positive, if you follow the arc of science fiction in the 1940s, the grandmasters of science fiction in the 30s and 40s and 50s and even earlier were talking about technologies that became realities in our time. Communication satellites were envisioned in the 1940s, didn't become realities until the 1970s, really. Um, there were there was a writer, Edgar Rice Burroughs, the same guy who wrote Tarzan, wrote a series called John Carter of Mars is kind of an like a faux title for it. It's not really, but I can't think of a better title for the overall series. Some people might call it the Barsoom series, but John Carter of Mars, the movie, a lot of people think that was a ripoff of Star Wars, and it wasn't. It's the other way around because John Carter of Mars, those books were written between 1914 and 1941, and I can tell you in the John Carter of Mars series a chief on Mars was a Jed. A king over chiefs was called a Jedak. There was a predator out in the wilds of Mars called a Sith. They had the sand pit where if you fell into the sand pit, this creature would eat you because it was buried under the sand and it would take forever to digest. There was the pit where the people had to fight this giant monster in the pit, kind of like Jabba the Hutt's pit with the monster in it. So many things in Star Wars were lifted right out of the John Carter of Mars books and taken and just put a different polish on. And John Carter was also a fencing champion. On Mars, they used swords, and the best swordsman was the one who got to become a chief because he had to go through duels. Well, in Star Wars, it was lightsabers instead of swords. I'm telling you, but I'm sidetracking here. The point is, John Carter of Mars and his princess Dejah Thoris, who he had to rescue, were flying to the moons of Mars in a ship controlled by artificial intelligence in a book that was written probably circa 1920. Think about that. Artificial intelligence was being talked about as far back as 1920, and it's becoming a reality in the 2020 timeframe. And I mean, you've got Siri, you've got Alexa, you've got self-driving cars coming up. Well, Edgar Rice Burroughs, the guy who wrote Tarzan back at the turn of the last century, was writing about a self-driving spaceship back then. So here we are 100 years later, and I'm telling you, if people can imagine it, it can come to pass. So we need to start imagining the positive. We need to imagine a future where artificial intelligence and technology make things better for humanity, not worse, not darker, better, brighter, more hopeful, and for everyone. It shouldn't matter what color someone is. It shouldn't matter whether they're a man or a woman. All that stuff does is pit us against each other. If we look at little artificial divisions like that, we have those divisions set up in our minds by the people who are in power to keep us from working together. Well, we should picture a future where it's bright and hopeful and we work together. That's what we should picture because what this, if you want to talk about one of the biggest problems in society, if you want to talk about the issues of race that we're dealing with now, one of the biggest things that we have to overcome, everyone, all of us, every single one of us, we need to overcome the programming of the past. We need to undo the brainwashing. We need to, I'm looking for the word here, but there's a word for it where you undo brainwashing of someone. Well, our whole society has been brainwashed for decades, and we need to undo that. And that's the only way we all overcome. And we need to undo the darkness of vision. Look at that word. Yeah, the grunge, the lack of hope, the lack of compassion, the elitism in the visions of the future that we've been handed, spoon-fed via corporate media and corporate entertainment. And we need to all do it together. So, if you got a mind for storytelling, whatever medium you choose to storytell in, tell a hopeful story, tell an uplifting story, and take that away from this episode of this show. All right. I know it's been a long soapbox, but it's something that needs to be said. And on that note, happy Vulcan fingers to you from the Agent of 42. And thank you for listening. And you can find this show at www.midwesterngeekandcali.com. And the visualizations for this show are done by Plane9. That is www.plane9.com. 9, the number 9. Plane9.com is where I get the visualization software to do the visualization for my audio episodes. I would like to thank them for that and encourage others that are looking for a decent visualizer. It takes a little bit of learning, not too bad, but it does a really wonderful job. And one of these times around, I'll do a how-to video on how to set up Plane9 to do simple visualizations on audio. But again, www.plane9.com for the visualizer software and www.midwesterngeekandcali.com for the show. This is episode 46, and you can find us on Twitter at Midwest Geek Cali on Twitter and on Facebook under groups, Midwestern Geek and Cali. Stop by on Facebook, like our page, join our group, add to the discussion. Hey, Stephen, I know you put the suggestion out there for nanotechnology. Well, there's some thinking on nanotechnology for you. And again, thank you everyone for listening and good night.